Okay, if you're watching this tutorial, that means that you are getting ready for your population and develop end of unit assessment. And this video is going to give you some guidance on how to set yourself up and get yourself prepared for this assessment, as well as giving you a range of practice questions that you can use to help yourself prepare fully, and which will definitely help you achieve a high mark in this assessment. So the first thing that you will have been guided to by your teacher, and which is part of this the Google Classroom, is the main revision checklist for the National 5 Geography. And if we have a look at that checklist, we will see here, if you've opened it up, a Google Sheet. And if we have a look at the Google Sheet, the first thing you're going to want to do once it's open is navigate to the section that is covered by the topic population development. Now, that topic falls within the section called human environments in the course. Okay, so if you were to click on that tab in the Google Sheet, you will find all of the learning outcomes that go with the human environments topics. And you will see the topic you've just completed, development population, is split into two. Now, it's very likely you'll have already completed an assessment on the development part of this unit at some point earlier on this term. So what we are looking at is the population section. Now, rather than ask you to revise the entire topic, and the population topic is a fairly large topic and you'll have spent quite a bit of time on it, identified here and ticked are the main learning outcomes which you need to make sure you have reviewed in preparation for the assessment. And you'll notice that there are some areas that haven't been selected. Now, these could be in a final exam, an end of year exam, or a final S4 exam. These could appear in terms of exam questions. However, for this end of unit, there's no need to review the material that covers these learning outcomes. Okay, let's just have a quick little look at some of these learning outcomes and what I recommend you do with them. That's the first step. And then the second step is I will run through a set of exam questions that you can practice and which I would strongly recommend you practice because they will directly guide you towards doing well in this end of topic assessment. So in this first learning outcome, you can see you're being asked to describe the distribution of population across the globe or across the UK. And the next two learning outcomes are actually where you need to explain why people live in different places across the globe, whether some areas are densely populated, as indicated here, and other areas are sparsely. Now, this could be either for the whole planet, or this could just be for the United Kingdom. Now, what I recommend you could do in preparation is build up your own notes, your own revision notes from the materials in the assignments that you've covered on these three topics. What you might choose to do is write these up as flashcards. So each of these learning outcomes could be a flashcard. And on the reverse side of the flashcard, you would actually have the answer. And you would get those ideas from your assignments. You could also, if you wished, use the BBC Bite Size for the population topic. And you will find as you get further into the course that we will provide you with other resources as you get closer to major exams, which would also be used to develop your revision notes and flashcards. What you'll notice here also on this little checklist is that if you complete one of the practice questions, which I'm going to go through in a second with you on this, then you might choose to tick that off. And that's a way of keeping track of all of the work that you do. And if you're really confident with how to approach one of these learning outcomes, and if you came up in the exam, you know you'd do well, you might choose to tick that. So using the little checklists like this is a good way of keeping track of your revision. Okay, let's now move on to actually doing a bit of direct revision. You will find part of this assignment a document titled, if you open it, the end of topic practice questions. Okay, so if you open that, you will find 4 areas to practice. Now, there aren't any questions, there's just a resource, but what I'm going to now go through is a series of possible questions you might encounter. And what you might choose to do is write down those or type down those questions after I tell you each one, pause this video, and then maybe practice an answer before moving on to the next part of the video. And there are 4, so we're going to go through each of those 4 in turn. Okay, and by the time we get to the end of number 4, and I tell you about some of the questions you might encounter with practice question 4, if you're able to confidently answer them all, then you will be fully prepared for this end of unit assessment. So let's have a look at practice question 1, describing and explaining population pyramids. Now, you will see there are 2 pyramids here, and a population pyramid is obviously just a graph. It's a bar graph or a type of bar graph that shows you the makeup of a population. So it shows you the number, in this case, the number of people in each age group, and it's broken down by male and female. So for example, with this country, Bolivia, I would be able to calculate by adding this number here, which is roughly 520,000 people, to the male side, which is about 550,000 people. And if I added those 2 together, I would get roughly around about 900,000 people are in the 0 to 4 age group in Bolivia. Okay. Now, what are the questions? Well, the first question that you get asked with population pyramids could be a describe question. And what a describe question is where you're asked to describe the population of a country using a pyramid. Now, if it's just with one pyramid, so describe the population structure of Bolivia, you need to identify 4 age groups and calculate the amount of people living in that age group. And because why 4? Because this question would typically be about 4 marks. Now, to do that, you would just simply do what I just said a second ago. You would maybe look at the youngest age group. That would be my recommendation. Add up the number of people in both sides. So that might be just doing a little bit of calculation on a piece of paper. And then write down the number of people in the 0 to 4 age group is 900,000. What you then want to do is maybe pick an age group that's different from that. So you might move up the pyramid and say, however, in the 30 to 34 age group, there are far less. But what you must do before you finish that sentence is actually say how much less. So once again, that would be adding this side. So that's roughly 400,000. And this side here, which is also roughly 400,000. So that's 800,000. So that's more than 100,000 less people in the 30 to 34 age group. So you would want to do either 4 different age groups and compare them to each other. Or what you could do is you could actually pick a gender and compare it. So you might notice, for example, in the 75 to 79 age group, there are slightly more females than there are males, maybe a few thousand more, and you could point that out. So that's the first question. And the second question might be for the Netherlands, but we'll be doing exactly the same as I've just gone through. There are a couple of other questions. So you might be asked to compare and contrast these 2 countries. Now, in that case, what you need to do is calculate how many are in an age group, for example, the 0 to 4, and then compare that with the Netherlands. So does Bolivia have more or less in that same age group? And assuming it's a 4-mark question, you would just need to do that for 4 different age groups. Probably I would recommend picking age groups where there's noticeably different numbers of people between the 2 countries. Now, the third question is where you are asked to describe the changes in a country over time. Now, in this case, it might be Bolivia 2016, but this pyramid could be Bolivia 2050. So it would be what they're expecting Bolivia's pyramid to look like in the future. Now, all you've got to do there is say in Bolivia in 2016, in the 0 to 4 age group, has this number of people. In the future, in 2016, it will have, and in this case, you would say whether it grown or shrunk. So it's basically telling me what's happening in one country, whether each age group is growing or shrinking over time. All of these are describe questions. Now, the explain part of this, and that's a bit harder, that might be worth 5 or 6 marks. That is where you get asked to give reasons for the population structure. So that is all about birth and death rates. So in Bolivia's case, it's got very high birth rates because it's got a very wide base to the pyramid. So why are there lots of children? And you would give me 3 or 4 reasons for why a country like Bolivia has lots of children. Your last 2 or 3 reasons would be, why does Bolivia have very few old people? Because we'll notice it's very narrow in the old age groups. Now that's to do with death rates. So what factors cause a country like Bolivia maybe to have quite high death rates? Why are people not living into the older ages? Okay, that is assuming you get a Bolivia style pyramid. But if you were to get a Netherlands style pyramid and asked to explain it, you'd be telling me, why does the Netherlands have relatively few children? So why are they having few kids? So that is a reason for low birth rates. Likewise, why is Netherlands having lots of people in the older age groups? So that is, why do people live much longer in a country like the Netherlands? So to answer an explain question involving population pyramids, you might be looking to give 5 or 6 reasons for differences in births and death rates. Okay, so review each of the questions I've outlined. Make sure you can answer any one of them. Let's now have a look at practice question 2. Now, practice question 2 is about explaining the distribution. Now, it is possible to get a described version of this question, but you're not going to be asked to do that in the end of topic assessment this time. So we're just going to look at explaining. Now, in this case, we can see a world map that shows the different numbers of people living in different areas. And it's broken into 3 categories: areas with low population densities, so that's very few people per kilometer square, medium, and areas with high. Now, as this is an explain question, it's not about just telling me the pattern. It's why does it have this pattern? So why are there relatively few people maybe in the Sahara Desert? Likewise, why are there lots of people in the coastal region of Brazil over here? Why are there lots of people in the coastal area of eastern China? Okay. Why are there fewer people in the northern areas of the planet compared to the southern areas? Why are there few people in the Himalayas, the mountain areas here? Now, that is a question which would be asking you to explain the global distribution. So what are the reasons for the different reasons? Now, these could be physical reasons to do with the landscape, mountains, the latitude, the quality of the soils, for example, the nearness to rivers. Or it could be to do with human reasons like ports and trade and development. So you need to review your factors that can affect population distributions. Now, this question could appear, instead of it being the global, it could be a country. So why does a country like the UK have different population? So in that case, if that was the question you were being asked, and you might want to practice that one, for example, why are there fewer people in the Highlands of Scotland? Why are there few people in the northern regions of Scotland? Why do coastal regions of the UK have more people? Why are there more people living in the southeast of England near mainland Europe? Okay, so you would need to think of 4, 5, possibly 6 different factors that could cause variations just in the UK alone. And there is a notable variation where people live in our island, as well as being a global. The factors, however, are always the same. The reasons that cause there to be more or less people in the UK are the same reasons as why there are more or less people in different parts of the planet. Okay, so make sure you've practiced those 2 possible questions, explaining the global or explaining the UK. And then let's have a look at practice question 3. Now, these are sometimes seen as the easiest questions, but they can also be the hardest if you don't pay attention to the technique. Now, this is a described question, so you're not being asked to give reasons. You're just being asked to say what you can see. And in this case, it's a trend on a graph. Now, the graph will almost always be a graph that shows a period of time along the x-axis. So we can see 1990 to 2010. The graph will also show you something changing. That could be increasing or it could be decreasing. Now, in this case, we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions, which has got nothing to do with population, but it doesn't actually matter. I've just picked this as an example because it's how you answer it, which is how you get the marks, not the reasons you give. So how do you do this? Well, in this case, let's have a look at, first of all, pay attention to the title of the graph. So this graph is about worldwide greenhouse gas emissions between a series of dates. Okay, this type of question would be worth 4 marks, so you'd be looking to make 4 statements. And we've also got to see if there's a key. In this case, there is, because we've got 2 colors. We can see the gray is carbon dioxide and the black is nitrous oxide. We can also see that the amount of carbon dioxide is being measured in numbers in millions of tons. So how do you answer it? Well, you always should start at the beginning and give the amount. So let's give the amount of carbon dioxide in 1990. We can see that it's 25,000. Now, what we want to do is it changing? Well, it's increasing. Actually, we notice it increases every single year. But what we want to do is maybe pick something we might notice in the graph when it increases quite noticeably. So you might say it increases by about 3,000 up to the year 2000. So from 1990, when it was 25, it's jumped by about 3,000 to 28,000 in the year 2000. It then jumps by about another 5,000 to 32,000 in 2005, further increasing again in 2010 to about 35,000. Now, what you can do once you've worked your way through each of the dates is you could calculate what that overall change is from when it began to when it ended. So, for example, it's gone from 25,000 to 35,000, which is a 10,000 million ton increase over the 20 years in this graph. Okay. Notice all of the way along, I was using dates and I was calculating amounts and whether it's growing or shrinking. In this case, it was always growing. I ignored 1995 because there was almost no change, so it wasn't really worth me mentioning it. I could then do the same for nitrous oxide and methane. Now, you'll notice, first of all, it's a bit more difficult to calculate because what you've got to do is you've got to take the bottom, which is 25,000, the top, which is almost 35,000. So nitrous oxide is 10,000 tons in 1990. So that's what I'd want to say. In 1990, nitrous oxide was 10,000 tons. Now you'll notice it doesn't really increase or decrease in 1995, still 10,000. But in 2000, has it increased? It's increased a little bit, maybe by about 1,000 or so, or 2,000. So you might want to point that out. The big increase, however, happens up to 2010, where we can see we're up to about 12,000. Okay, so once again, I didn't pick every single year. I picked a few years where something had changed, and I mentioned the year and the amount of change. Now, when you talk about the amount of change, you can either say it's gone from 10 to 12,000, or you could say it's increased by 2,000 from 1990 to 2010. Now, as long as you make 4 statements about some changes that you've seen in the graph and the amount of change that's happening, you'll get your 4 marks. It's very important you do not ever explain why those changes are happening, because this is a describe question and you will encounter many of these questions in the exam. So I would suggest you maybe practice, now that you've listened to my answer, writing your own answer to this type of question. Let's have a look at practice question 4. Now, I've put these 2 population pyramids for the United States and Kenya here as an example, because sometimes this question appears like this, where it gives you a pyramid. But the question is quite different, because the question is asking you to explain the consequences, that's another word for the effects, of either an aging or a youthful population. Now, sometimes they won't tell you what the effects of the aging population are. They'll just give you a pyramid and say, what problems might the United States have in the future? So what you've got to do is look at the United States, look at the pyramid in this case, and decide, is the United States a country that's got lots of young people? Or is it a country that's got relatively high amounts of older people? Well, we can see in the US, it's clearly a country with lots of older people. Okay, it's got quite a narrow bottom and much more at the top. So what we have here is an aging population. So what are the effects of an aging population? So that's what you need to look in your notes. So having lots of old people means you're going to have to think about increasing the pensions, paying for old people's pensions, building more retirement homes for older people to live in, thinking about funding healthcare more because old people are more likely to get unwell. You might have to raise taxes because you've got to pay for all these extra costs of having more old people. You also got to think about the fact that there's fewer younger people coming through, so that means you're not going to have as many workers in the future. So who's going to be paying all these taxes? Who's going to be filling the jobs? You've also got relatively few young people, children, so that's going to create problems in education, universities. And also in the future, you're going to have less workers because you've got less children. So those are the typical problems that I would expect a country like the US to have because it's got an aging population. And it's well worth practicing an answer now to what are the consequences of a country with lots of elderly. Then what I do is look in your notes or revise on the BBC website this population pyramid. Now, this is the opposite of the US. This is a country with huge numbers of young. So this is what we call a youthful population. But once again, the question might not tell you what the problems of a youthful population. It might just say, what are the kind of problems Kenya is likely to have in the future? So in this case, we're talking about a country with lots of young people. So is there enough school places? Will there be enough jobs for these children when they get older? Is there enough houses for them? Is there going to be enough food to feed this population? Okay, so it's well worth preparing an answer that thinks through the kinds of problems that countries like the United States or Kenya have based on the numbers of people they have in different age groups. So those are the two typical questions. This question commonly comes up, and it's often worth quite a lot. It could be worth 5 or 6 marks, so you need to know your knowledge about the effects of and consequences of either aging or youthful populations. Right, that's it for all of the practice questions. If you're finishing off the tutorial now, check back through your checklist. Have you written out these learning outcomes? Can you respond to any question that comes up on any of these learning outcomes? Have you worked through all of the practice questions that I've reviewed? And I have reviewed a possible practice question covering each of these learning outcomes. And are you now completed and confident that when you see a question that looks similar to one of the questions I've reviewed, that you would get a good mark for it? Okay, so good luck, and make sure you use this video repeatedly, maybe practicing it, rewinding it, and covering these questions on a number of occasions.